I have the pleasure to introduce our visiting speaker, Meg Spratt. She's here for an interview and a visit around the Integrated Social Science Degree Completion Program. And I just made a little notes looking at Meg's CV, so I want to share a couple things about Meg. Meg I don't know if you happen to look at the CV, notice that she lives on Victory Lane, okay, in town here, so always good, all right. She went to UCLA for her undergraduate, crossed town and went to USC for her master's in journalism. Worked in journalism starting with the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner, no longer in existence, newspaper. Then moved up north to Northern California and continued to work in journalism at several newspapers. Don't know how many of those are still going, but ended at the Napa Valley Register for a couple of years. She began to teach at Menlo College in mass communications and taught there for a number of years as a full-time faculty and then later as an adjunct faculty.
Other way around. Started as an adjunct.
Oh, did you? Okay, so okay. See, the journalist in her is correct, right? No? She came here to the University of Washington for her PhD in 1998. Earned it in 2002, like the speed at which she moved through that. Jerry Bolisi was your advisor, is that right?
He was.
Yeah.
You were on my committee.
I know, I remember that, yep. Went to work for the Dart Center for Journalism and Trauma for a decade, 2002 to 2012, eventually becoming the Associate Director for Dart West here. She ran programs, educational programs, she headed up conferences and awards, she managed students and interns and all kinds of other elements to that, and budgets and all kinds of pieces for that program. Along the way, Meg has taught a wide number of courses for us. I was looking at that list, it's half the curriculum, both in the classroom and online. She's supported us in staff positions as well, and she's regularly contributed to our public events. And she was just recently one of the key organizers for our Why Journalism Matters conference earlier this month. She's here for a potential position in the Integrated Social Sciences Degree Completion Program, which Matt Spark right here is the head of, right? So let's welcome Matt.
Thank you, everyone, for coming, both my ISS colleagues and my COM colleagues. And I hope we'll have a chance a little bit later for people to do some quick introductions because I don't think everybody knows each other. But I want to go right into my talk. The title, as you can see, is My Pedagogical Journey from Nixon to Now through 3 keywords. This is going to take a little explaining to tell you why I came up with this structure and where I'm going with this. And to do that, I want to start with last summer, June 2016, when I received a bunch of boxes from my home in Southern California containing a lifetime of personal artifacts. My mother had died a few months earlier, back in January of 2016, and my oldest brother, had finished selling the house, packing everything up, and shipping it to its appropriate places. So I found myself literally and metaphorically unpacking my life, and just going through things, some things that I remembered, some things I had forgotten about, many things I didn't know still existed. So this is a sample of what some of that looked like. This is probably contents of one of the boxes. And as I was doing this, I really found myself discovering connections between my childhood, my early adulthood, and my present-day personal life and professional life. I want to point out just a couple of things in this. A couple of my early examples of academic work are in the forefront. That's my family over there on the left. And you probably recognize me. I'm that little one on the right. This is, and I wish I had more time to talk about this because I think this work in the front would make a great academic study. This is a book called My Mother Can. Okay, and this is one page in the book, My Mother Can Cook. I think I did this when I was about 6. And I think this was a pretty standard assignment back then. And I don't know if any of you had assignments like this, but the interesting thing as I was going through this as an adult was that my mother, who taught math as a young woman and high school math, had a master's degree in journalism. She's very smart, talented, a good writer. According to this book, she could cook, she could sew, she could sweep, she could get the milk. This was in the days of the milkman delivery. And she could watch TV. Okay, and apparently she also wore these very colorful outfits and high heels when she cooked. And I don't remember her ever wearing that. So I started getting interested in, what media images was I drawing from here in talking about my mother. My husband was looking at this just a couple of days ago and loved my mom, liked my mom, but also pointed out, cooking wasn't one of her talents. So anyway, it got me thinking about it. Is Anita here? Yeah, Anita, some of the things that we were talking about earlier about gender and sex roles and where those come from and these connections between childhood and today. Okay, so this is where I kind of started with this talk of thinking about these connections from my childhood to now. And that became clearer as I started to work with students in ISS on a core assignment that we give them. I started actually teaching ISS courses last quarter, and this is one of the first things we ask them to do, is come up with a list of social science keywords and then begin to develop it. They do this throughout their career with ISS, so that by the end, by their capstone, they have this fully developed keyword glossary with visuals and references and fully developed definitions. So I drew from this one of the early assignments, which was to have students produce a draft list of social science keywords, identify particular social issues or controversies connected to each keyword, and begin to conduct library research connected to those issues. As I was learning this assignment myself, I was also thinking about all these other things that I was unpacking in my life, and I found it really resonated with me and gave me a structure to think about the keywords that were important to my personal life, to my professional life, and the linkages between those words and those terms and those concepts. So that's where I'm going with this talk. I'm going to follow this structure without going into the library research. Sorry, Reed, I didn't include that in this project. But go through 3 keywords that especially resonated with me as I unpacked my life. The first one is truth, and this takes us back to Nixon. My keyword journey from Nixon to now. In 1974, that's me in 1974, I was, as I just did with David, I was the fact checker in the family. And I was already thinking about sort of what truth is and what facts are. I would be the one who, when my older sister was telling some really great, dramatic, emotional story about what happened during the day, I would stand by and say, no, that's not what happened, and here are the facts. And so that's who I was from an early age. When 1974 rolled around, my family that summer went on vacation to Lake Arrowhead. And what I remember from that vacation is sitting in front of the TV throughout the day watching the Watergate hearings. So that's essentially what I remember. Okay. At the same time, my oldest brother and his wife, who are still 2 of my favorite people and people that I use as role models, were finishing up their master's degrees from University of Missouri School of Journalism. So I was getting this kind of sense of what journalism was all about from them, watching the Watergate hearings, and really starting to think about the concept of truth and journalism in a democratic society. So that brings up the issue here, the core issue for me, is what is the role of a free press in a democracy? Something that I've been interested in ever since. This also brings up a number of other keywords, related keywords, that I had to sort of set aside, but I just wanted to look at these connections here. Integrity, transparency, objectivity, the role of journalism as the fourth estate, democracy, power, all things that clearly resonate today. Yeah. So that was 1974. Nixon era. Several years later, I go to UCLA, major in sociology, I'm especially interested in this concept of truth as it's related to the sociology of knowledge. In one of those boxes I was talking about earlier, one of my favorite treasures from those boxes was my UCLA notebooks that I didn't know still existed. This is a page from one of those notebooks. I opened this up last summer when I was teaching 389, Race, Gender, and Sexuality in Media, and was really surprised to see the parallels between what I was teaching in class that week and what my notes from 80, 81. So I had Goffman talking about ads as typifications, ritualization, media as myth, and Leilani, you're smiling. It's like, this is what we teach, right? And I had forgotten that there was that close a parallel to my undergraduate work and what I do now. So I really was fascinated by that. So this is all related to truth, sociology of knowledge, concepts from Durkheim, Mark, Goffman, structural functionalism, myth, ritual, construction of reality, and then getting into these big picture, profound issues of morality, religion, equality, social justice, all of which I could talk about forever, but we need to move on. So that brings us to, this is just the issues, kind of how I'm connecting all this so far. Issues, how are truth, fact, and reality related? Is there such a thing as objective truth? And before I go on to my next keyword, I want to take a quick little side trip into the world of journalism and the Dart Center, because I'm skipping over a lot of that. But there are certainly connections between all of this and what I did professionally, both as a journalist and with the Dart Center for Journalism and Trauma. So, issues like objectivity, newsroom culture, representations of race and gender, sensitivity, how to cover tragic events and trauma in a sensitive and accurate way. And if you want to know more about that, I'm giving a guest talk tomorrow morning in Crisis Communications right down the hall, 9:30, on that topic, on trauma journalism. Elodie, who's teaching the class, said she's happy to have people come in and sit in if anyone wanted to hear about that, more of that aspect of my career. So that leads me to my next keyword, liminality. I probably was exposed to this concept coming from anthropologist Victor Turner, probably as an undergrad, but what I remember is really diving into this in a class with Nancy Rivenberg in my first year here at UW. And Nancy introduced this as a concept in media. Basic definition here is a term used to designate a space or state which is situated in between other, more usually clearly defined spaces, periods, or identities. I found some, as I was preparing this presentation, I found some visuals I really like. And this is one of my favorites, of the space of going from one thing to another. And I became immediately fascinated with how this works in media, how media messages or media images create liminal spaces in which people read or see or are exposed to this sort of in-between space and create meaning out of that space. The metaphors I most often hear with the concept of liminality are the threshold, doorway between dawn and dusk, these transitional spaces, also the shoreline metaphor. But I was most interested in how this worked in terms of visual images in journalism. As an editor, I had noticed that readers responded really differently to visual images, to photographs, than they did to the news story itself. We would get calls, for instance, from people who were just incensed about someone who had committed a crime only after that person's picture had been printed in the newspaper. Okay, so they would read the story about this horrific crime, But the emotions weren't tapped, and they didn't start to really create meaning out of this until they saw an image. So I drew from that idea and started to think about how iconic photographs, news photographs, serve as liminal spaces in which viewers negotiate feelings, beliefs, attitudes about cultural mythology, collective memory, social justice. So again, this is tied back to truth, the idea of how truth is connected to constructed reality. And mythology as truth, how we construct our own cultural mythologies, where that comes from, and the role that visuals play. So as I began to study this, I did a series of sessions with undergrads here, totaling, I think, a few hundred people total, where I would have people down in 104, down the hall, and I would show each group a series of 3 iconic photographs and let them linger on each photograph for a little bit, and then they would write, if they recognized the photograph, what the photograph meant to them, if the photograph had any personal meaning to them, and then they would choose the photograph of the 3 that they were shown that had the most power, that they thought had the most power. So let me show you some examples of the images I used in that project. And I'm just going to give you a minute to think about, updated successfully, I guess that's good.
Thank you for doing it.
Okay. Just give you a minute to look at these and kind of ask yourself those questions. Probably I'll recognize this. What does it mean? Does it have any personal meaning to you? Next one. And finally, I used 9 images in this project total. And again, I used them in groups of 3. These are 3 of the 9 I used. Probably all, and I'll just ask you to nod. Do you all recognize these? All have some meaning for you? Certainly cultural, historical meaning. Maybe meanings having to do with power structures. As I worked with those 9 photos and started to see these ranges of answers and some patterns in them, for instance, there was a difference in how the young men and the young women saw these photos. The men would talk about the war images as being most powerful and having more of a connection to their personal beliefs. The young women did tend to be drawn more to the images of like the mother image, for instance. It became clear, though, that there was too much there to work into just one project. So I broke this down to studying 4 different photographs, and I'm going to get to this last one, which became my dissertation, in a second, but I'll tell you that some of the other ones I studied and did projects on, wrote papers on, was first a qualitative analysis where I looked at how media used images of John Kennedy Jr. saluting his father's casket in November 1963, which was John Kennedy Jr.'s 3rd birthday, I believe, that the day he was doing that. And I saw some nods there, so I think you know what photograph I'm talking about without even showing it, I think. So I looked at how that was used by news media when John Kennedy Jr. himself died in a plane crash in 1999, and about how that image was constructed, and a few other images of him were used to construct this myth of John Kennedy Jr. as a prince, as an American prince, as royalty. Another paper I did that was published was a study of the uses and interpretations of the flag raising on the Iwo Jima photo that you just saw before and after September 11th. Okay, so I had already done this piece before September 11th, in which students had seen that image and wrote about it. I did exactly the same study after September 11th using the same 3 photos, and that was one of them, and then compared the results of before and after. The third thing I did was an extensive content analysis and experimental design using this photograph, police dogs attacking protesters and bystanders in 1963. I used this one and one other by a different photographer. So I did a content analysis looking at the uses of this at the time in 1963, and then an experimental design where I showed students, again here at UW, different versions of a news story, one with a photo and one without, and then combined all that into my dissertation. So let me walk you through that a little. This is a segment of my dissertation that was published in American Journalism. That comes directly from the published version. So the methods, again, were content analysis, in which I looked at the original use in 1963, and then how the photographs were used again at the end of the century in 1990s retrospectives. I did this experimental design in which subjects were shown 2 versions of a story about civil rights, one with an iconic photograph and one without the photograph. And I did bring in, this is my dissertation. I was thinking about just standing here and reading it out loud, but decided against that. But I did bring it in because it shows the experimental designs that I used for this. And Zara, I don't know if you want to just pass that around so people can get a closer look. If you have any questions as I go along, if you need any clarification on any of this, please let me know. So I'm going through this pretty quick. The findings in this study included, and these are just some of the findings, I'm kind of rounding this out. For the students who received the version of the news story with the photograph, their recall of the textual information was less. So apparently being able to view that photograph, and something about that photograph, the visual image, made them not remember or pay as close attention to the actual facts in the story. Okay. Second finding. Subjects who received the version with the photograph reported higher levels of negative emotion towards America. And in other words, I asked this series of questions about how they felt about America, not connecting it directly to the story itself, but for the people who saw the photograph, they expressed more negative feelings. So that was a direct finding. An indirect finding was that there was a correlation between these negative emotional responses and opinions about race, gender, even though gender wasn't really a part of the story, but it carried over into gender attitudes, and opportunity. So that students who, or subjects who had expressed higher negative responses also expressed stronger opinions that there was more of a problem with equality, and that something needed to be done to provide more opportunities for people. Okay, so that brings me to a sentence directly out of my dissertation that comes back to liminality, in which I concluded, such a photograph provides an ambiguous liminal space in which individuals and the public can renegotiate attitudes and perceptions about good and evil, right and wrong, and black and white. And though time has passed since I did this, I'm coming up next week on my 15th anniversary of defending my dissertation in this room. I think you can still see the parallels between this power of visual images then and power of visual images now in both for perception on the individual level and in public dialogue, even political action. Okay. So that takes me to my third keyword, integration. And before I go on with this, I struggle with the integration a little because it's very much a core part of what we do with ISS. It's part of the title of ISS, Integrated Social Studies. But the first thing that comes to mind for me as a child of the 60s is integration as synonymous with desegregation. Okay, so when I hear integration, the first definition that comes to mind is this whole unpacking of my own attitudes and my own curiosity about what desegregation was and is all about, its pros and cons, the good things it has done for people, the negative things it has done. I went to a school, a grade school that was a half a block away from my house. And we did have mandatory busing, so kids from other neighborhoods were bused in. And it wasn't really until I became an adult that I started to feel really uncomfortable with that and thinking, wow, that was great for me. You know, I walked half a block and got this great cultural experience. I don't know what that was like for my classmates who had to come in from a different neighborhood. So those thoughts come to mind when I think about integration. But for the current definition, I'm using a very different integration in a very different context, coming directly from what we do in ISS. So going back again to ISS 301, Social Science Theory and Context, we tell students that keywords help them find this integrative relationship among all the different disciplines comprising the degree, and also integrates our own social interests and expertise into the social science education. So again, it's finding these connections between social science, our own lives, our attitudes, our academic experiences, our family, our personal experiences. But another key part of integration that I've started thinking about as I've been working with ISS is integration on the staff and faculty level of our own experiences, our own professional backgrounds, academic interests. And that's one of the things that I think is really so valuable about, and this exists in COM too, but in ISS it's formalized, that this integration of experience on the staff and faculty level is part of what we offer to students. So my illustrations for this is this is Dr. Vanini and myself at our Friday Harbor retreat. So this is the COM ISS team, yay. We went to Friday Harbor a few weeks ago. I don't remember how long ago it was now, a couple weeks ago, and spent a couple of really intensive days integrating our experiences. In fact, here's the whole group. And it was an amazing experience, talking about our points of view from different disciplines, different professional backgrounds, and always with the goal of talking about how to use this to create a quality educational experience for students. And I came out of that feeling just really both refreshed, re-inspired, and just like this is a great model. If there are ways to find a way to replicate this in other areas, it should be done. So, I want to bring this back all together now and talk about what I have done by looking at these three key words, and remind you that this came from this assignment that I borrowed from 301. So I wanted to tie this together by integrating my three key words, and this is what I came up with. how can we use the online teaching environment as a liminal space to integrate disciplinary perspectives, personal and professional experiences, and foster critical thinking about the contested and constructed nature of truth? Okay, so that's the question. I have an answer, or the beginnings of an answer. I think we're all still trying to figure this out. But before I get into the answer, I do want to address a couple of challenges in doing this that came up in some of the meetings that we had this morning and that I've heard in other contexts. There are challenges in doing this in the online environment. A few that I found are the lack of flexibility in the online course design, at least the way that we're doing it here at UW now, is the course material is all created in advance. We have videos and PowerPoint presentations that aren't easily changed, so that within the context of some of the course material, you can't do what we do normally in a classroom course where you change things just before you walk in that day because Donald Trump has tweeted something that's relevant. Or, well, I won't go there. So there's some inflexibility in the content, and it's a challenge to find ways around that. I think there are ways to do it in the discussion areas and other things. But something to think about. Another one is creating a presence for the instructor. And again, we have the core courses are all pre-designed. The courses I've been teaching for the last 2 quarters are not courses I designed. It's material I love to teach, but it's not material I created. So it's a challenge for all of us who are doing that to find ways to make sure that the students know who we are and why this is relevant to us, and why we are teaching this. And this is, Leilani and I have talked about this a little bit too. I've taught her version of COM 389, Race, Gender, and Sexuality in Media, which is a fantastic course. The students see and hear Leilani throughout, and that's challenging for someone else to come in and say, hey, I'm over here too. So we're looking at ways to do that. And finally, the last challenge I'll mention is recognizing issues with students and responding to them as quickly as possible. This issue, this challenge, I kind of think isn't that much difference from real-time classroom teaching. I'm not sure that I have any more ability to recognize a student issue if the student's sitting in the back of the class than I do online. In fact, sometimes online I think students are some students are more willing to kind of step forward in an email or a message to me and let me know that something's going on. That's a problem. But it's still something that I'm kind of thinking about, is how to make sure that I'm connecting with students on an individual basis. So those are some of the challenges. Some of the opportunities that I think online teaching really opens up is, again, this is about creating liminal spaces where people can really have these integrated experiences, allowing students to work at a comfortable pace that works best for them, while maintaining the intellectual integrity of the coursework. I think it's possible, and we are doing both. Eliminating barriers for students with disabilities. And these aren't just physical disabilities necessarily, but things like geographic barriers, family work responsibility balances. Okay, so this opens up, creates a space where students can get this education, but still balance these other things that they're dealing with. And finally, a big part of this is fostering discussion, peer review, and relationships online. I think we are more and more finding ways, really effective ways to do this for students. And students are taking advantage of that. The students that I've been working with, especially in ISS, really seem to like this online space when it comes to making these connections. So I want to end before we begin a little bit more of a discussion with sharing some student reflections. These came from my 301 theories course last quarter, student reflections on the ISS 301 experience. Here's another liminal visual, just so we're tying this all together here. So the first one, and I thought this one was interesting because it talks about technology specifically as a valuable part of the learning experience. Personally, the experience started for me by learning to navigate a learning platform. So this is an answer to what was valuable about this class. The ins and outs of the technology were new for me, which I believe will open doors of understanding. We've got this threshold thing going on. And for others unfamiliar with this form as well. So that one focused on the technology. This next one was in response to something somebody else had said specifically about courses over at Kane Hall. And this person said, I too had many lectures in those lecture rooms, talking about very specific rooms. And I don't think I ever spoke up in class just because of the fact I probably had to scream just to be heard by all 500 plus students. And then this goes on a little bit about that experience. And finally, there's a certain honesty and vulnerability that comes from the discussion you have in forums and peer reviews that you don't always receive when you're physically sitting in class with them, with the other students. Though it is a different kind of relationship since it lacks the physical presence, in some ways it can be more meaningful because of the authenticity of the conversations. And I thought this response really captured this idea of how we can use this online space nicely and why it can be so effective. I wanted this went on for a couple more paragraphs, this particular response, and so I didn't want to get it all up here, but I do want to read the end of it too. I believe that having these experiences allows you to keep going back into the world with an open mind and a better understanding outside of the city you live in. Openness, understanding, and consideration are key to being a global citizen. And that's how she ended her review of the online experience. And that's how I'm going to end my formal part of the talk. So thank you very much, and I would love to open it up to questions. David.
I'd like to ask a question a little bit about ISS. I could ask Matt, but I'd love to get your thoughts.
Sure.
And then think about, so it's a two-parter. One is about the structure of ISS classes, and then the second part is how you kind of navigate in that space.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned during the talk that the classes for the core have been created now, right?
Yes.
So who created those?
I think it was a different team for each course. Is that correct, Matt?
Yeah.
So you, for the 301, you were the lead person for 301?
Yes.
Yes. So this probably is a question for Matt. Do you want to?
Well, but Meg spoke about this recent workshop we had, and really it was just as you said, it was an opportunity for all of the advising staff and our librarian Reed and the lecturers to come together and revise these core courses.
Yeah.
So the original set had me and a person from the honors program, Francis McHugh, as the chief authors. It's meant to include Judy Howard as well. She didn't have time in the end, and so it was just the two of us. But this speaks to something else, and perhaps it goes back to David, and you can carry the conversation on. But one thing that you mentioned, I think is a challenge, but also something that I feel like we're working towards a solution on is this sort of fixity of the courses. Mm-hmm. And one of the ways we're overcoming that is through this sort of iterative process of revision, which involves bringing new people in, like Meg, who can then revise the materials using their own expertise.
Mm-hmm. And something that I talked about the team as a whole, but another key point there too is in this revision process that Matt's talking about. So this is the second stage of kind of what we're doing with these classes. Is that correct? So the first revision after the initial implementation. It's not just the faculty, it's the advisors and our librarian, Reed. So this experience of bringing all this information together isn't just about bringing in academic, disciplinary information, but also having the perspectives of the people who are working most closely with the students. So right now, we are all working together as a team to revise these courses to really make them something that I think all of us feel comfortable teaching, working with.
Actually, I've got a question on that. So as you talk about this iterative process, but I've never had to teach an online course I wouldn't lead. And that would have to be, I mean, the reason as a graduate student, and when I first got here, I refused to use textbooks is because there's another voice that's always in competition with the instructor. And it's not like if I'm reading primary text. I mean, it's someone who's basically built a course, and either I support the textbook or I fight with the textbook as an instructor.
Mm-hmm.
That's doubly so if it's an online course. So is the goal of sort of a second stage or a third stage, is the goal to sort of refashion the course around you, or is it to create a course that's around no one, right? So it would have videos like Lonnie, would have videos of you, videos of somebody else.
Well,
so
but my argument is that that's not no one. That's,
well, it's not identified as a specific one.
Right, and so I would say B is the answer, is that we're, and the courses already are designed as, there are videos of Matt setting the course up, but each lesson has different instructors talking about social science theory from their discipline, from their point of view. So that's what these core courses look like. When we get up to the thematic courses in ISS, that's the more traditional one instructor speaking, and that's where, for me, it gets into this more issue that you're talking about.
That's kind of what I was asking about.
Exactly.
Those courses where you're teaching like Lonnie, and so it's like they see her, but then occasionally they see you. So is the goal eventually with those courses to kind of also multiply the instructional presence?
I would not say that that's a goal yet. I think we're still trying to figure that out. Something I haven't mentioned in the context of this talk yet is I'm also redesigning right now the online version of COM 304 American Press and Politics, which I've talked to some of you about individually. And it's the first online course in a couple of years I've done myself from beginning to end. And I'm loving it because I have that kind of control. Although American Press and Politics is kind of interesting to design a course around right now. But I'm also trying to keep in mind as I do this, what if I can't teach it some quarter? And how can I make it, how can I build in some flexibility for whoever else might come in to teach it so that she or he can turn much of it into their own? And I don't know if I have a good answer for that. It's one of those things that we're still grappling with in designing online classes. Other questions? Can we just take a minute to have the ISS team introduce themselves? Because I don't think you know. And I think most people know you because you're part of the department.
And most people know me. I'm Sara Bernini, and I'm also a lecturer here and in the social sciences. And having me here as well. So,
I'm Reed Garber-Pearson. I'm the ISS librarian.
And I'm Bridget Norquist. I'm one of 4 academic advisors at ISS with Mel Wenzel, Johanna, and Amy Kelly.
And I think, does everyone know you, Matt?
I think so. And Matt Stark. Hi, everyone.
So what other questions do you have for me? Yes?
I'm curious, this is not a pedagogical question. I'm curious about 2 of your words, truth and liminality, and then as it applies to visuals. And I'm wondering now, 15 years beyond your dissertation, and thinking about the ways in which photos can be manipulated now, and the technology around that, and how you approach the study of visuals, and thinking about that core concept of truth in terms of the way in which they are shared, they scale, and clearly through your research, as we know, that they have a tremendous impact in the way that we see media or the news.
And I will say that's a great question, and it also connects to the historical fact that photo manipulation is, I'm sure you know, did not start with the internet, right, or with Photoshop. It goes back really to the beginning of photographic technology, and there are these examples from Matthew Brady's work in the Civil War, where it was not necessarily the photograph itself that was manipulated, but they would move the bodies on the battlefield, is the story, to manipulate the image to make it more artistic. And certainly a photograph itself, being in a square or rectangle, is a manipulation of reality. So I think, I look at tying that historical information to how that's changed, how manipulation perhaps is now in our hands as media users, as people who are putting photos out there themselves. What's the application now where you put like dog ears on yourself? And then,
Snapshot.
so is that Snapshot? So we now have these tools to do this ourselves, right? Where it used to be kind of in the realm of the photographer or the editor. I would love to, there are all kinds of studies I would like to do if I went back and was doing more research. One is to do a similar study using some of the same photographs, only having people view them on their devices, rather than I'd show them kind of in this form, one by one, in kind of slide form. But see if we get a different response of people looking at them in different technological forms. I don't know if that really gets to your question about manipulation.
Your point about in your research that the visual did not assist in the substantive understanding of what was being written.
Yeah.
If anything, it's distractive.
Yeah.
And so as we move towards this saturation where a lot of legacy medias are going for the visual overall, over everything, I just think it's so interesting to imagine what that then portends for our ability to
process information.
Process and absorb what is true.
And to think critically.
Yeah.
I think it's a great question. In fact, I didn't really realize till I saw a story just before I walked in that we're just on the 25th year anniversary of the LA riots after the Rodney King beating and verdict. And I remember really clearly, I had just started teaching then in California, and I showed my students one day a news clip of the looting, and that's a whole other thing, what we're calling the action and the implications of that. But showing them a news clip where the visuals were of people smashing windows and taking TV sets and things burning. The voiceover was all about the bus schedules and what streets were open and how people could get one point of LA to the other point of LA. So it was this mundane logistical material about how to maneuver around the city. Not one person in the class, after I showed this clip, could say that that's what the story was about. No one heard the logistical information. It was all about looting. So I think even then, there were these visuals that really had this power to make meaning out of the story. And it's just, you're right, it's just, more and more of that. Yes?
I'm sorry I came late. You must have office hours for
Sure.
your class, your discussion of office hours. But teaching about race, media, power, gender online, while you're teaching in a class, particularly fraught issues. So in an online classroom, what do you build in to head off maybe trolling behavior that potentially could come up, or just handle those difficult conversations in an online atmosphere?
I have not had much trouble in online discussions with, let me put it in a more positive way. I've had a positive experience with where students go in those online discussions. So I haven't had too much trouble in having to head off things. And there are a couple of reasons I think that exists. I mean, we do have rules of etiquette that are part of each online class. This is how you should structure your assignment. Please don't make personal comments. Focus on the academic issues, not on you can draw from your personal attitudes and feelings, but that's not the main part of the post. But I think another big issue is that these discussions are not anonymous, unlike other forums, other online forums, so that people have to have their names and their faces connected to their comments. I also think that most of my students, both online and in the classroom, are really pretty good at being civil with each other. I know that has not always been the experience, and Carmen, I know you've had some alternative experiences with that.
Yeah, I had a similar question.
Uh-huh.
I think we were in a workshop together kind of thinking through some of these things.
Yeah.
And you were a little shocked to hear my experiences.
Uh-huh.
And I have heard from others that your students seem to be just more dedicated and willing to have these conversations.
When you say, are you talking about ISS students?
This is what I've heard when I've been considering maybe teaching one of the courses. That the platform itself facilitates more deeper conversations than happen in class. And maybe more respectful conversations.
Yeah.
Than what, a big lecture.
What I've had happen in class often is not that the conversation is disrespectful, but people just shut down, and it's really hard to get. And you don't want to call on people and say, hey, I bet you have some interesting story to tell based on who I think you are. And so it's hard to find I've had a hard time finding just the right formula in the classroom for creating a space that's comfortable for people to talk, but isn't putting inappropriate pressure on them to share very personal stories. In the online environment, I think that might be a little bit easier, again, because people have more time to process. They have, can think about somebody's comment overnight. And Matt, you're nodding. Do you have something to add to that?
I really agree with you. And I thought that quotation you used was very resonant, that last one. There is a certain honesty and vulnerability that comes from the discussion that you have in the forums. And I think that's been a common refrain amongst our students. And I agree with you that the asynchronous nature of the conversation is part of the reason why people really can think and deliberate before they put something out there. So good experience.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And maybe knowing that everyone will be reading each other's comments, I think requiring everyone to make the comments has been helpful, because you don't get one voice dominating the conversation. I've had really good experiences. But I wasn't expecting it, actually. And people who are agreeing on each other's comments.
The one last thing I'd add to that is that we have had some graduated over 100 students now. We've got 300 students in the program. There have been some challenging characters in the mix, but that said, one of the other things that I think makes the online space, at least in ISS, more conducive to authentic conversations and less threatening conversations for some students is that how if you're in Kane Hall and you're lecturing, there's certain voices that just dominate in the student body. They feel more self-confident to stand up and speak up, and they dominate that classroom space, and they make other students feel very shy. And I think that's one thing that online sort of gets rid of.
Yeah.
Kind of, it's not trolling in the classroom. I don't know what you would call it, but a very kind of embodied bullying in a way that you sometimes see in a physical classroom.
I also, Anita was asking me about this when we talked earlier today, and I want to share an example that I shared with her that was an example of using an online discussion by necessity that worked out really well. So 2 years ago, I had like the worst first day of spring quarter ever, or one of the worst days of my life ever. On the first day of spring quarter 2 years ago, my dad died that day, and I had the stomach flu. So, I was just wiped out in a mess, and there was no way I was going to make it to campus that day to teach the two evening degree classes I had to teach. So I had to kind of figure out what to do. It was the only time I've ever missed the first day of class. And I decided just to throw out an online, as in place of their first class, an online introductory discussion where I came up with a couple of prompts. And it turned out to be one of the best introductory discussions I've ever had in the classroom. That by the time 2 days later I got into the classroom, I'd had this wealth of information and connections and discussion come over this 2-day discussion that I was then able to use once I got into the classroom. And I think that maybe, as Anita was asking me about this, I realized I haven't really used that as much as I should have since then. But I think it is perhaps one tool we can use even with the traditional courses. Yes?
Well, I just
And Randy had his hand
go ahead,
too.
Randy.
So.
Go ahead, Randy.
Sure. So, I guess in your ideal world, what other than teaching in the ISS program, what kind of role do you think ISS instructors should have in the department that they're, that's their home? What kinds of things would you like to do? What kinds of things do other ISS instructors attached to specific academic units do beyond the teaching?
I can really only answer that from my own perspective, which is unique since I've been with the department so long and have been in these different roles with, as an alum, as a staff member, as a faculty member. But I feel like I want to continue that, again, that integration of experience and help, I think, we as a team, and we've talked about this a little, would like to kind of find ways to work together with both the ISS side and, I'm about to drop the microphone, the ISS side and the comm side, doing things like the news literacy, what do we call that conference, half-day conference that we just did. That Rita and I had to miss because we were, Rita and Sarah and I, we all had to miss because we were in Friday Harbor. But that was a great collaborative effort that I'd like to see more of. Randy, I don't know if that specifically answers your question, but.
Yeah, I mean, do you all see yourselves as having a role on doing departmental service?
I do.
Okay.
I do. I mean, that's something that I've really have been trying to do even as a part-time instructor, and I really want to continue to do. I'd like to be more involved with talking to Andrea over lunch today about perhaps being more involved again with the journalism faculty, doing more of these kind of planning session kind of things. I'd love to talk to you before you leave about DART and how you see the DART professorship moving forward, and if you think there are ways to continue with the DART work in the comm and or ISS realm. So yes.
I think we should wrap it up. This is great. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, everybody.